Prologue. In the distant reaches of the galaxy, where stars twinkled like forgotten dreams, the Tholian Empire ruled with an iron fist. For centuries, their insectoid legions, armed with crystalline web ships and devastating plasma weapons, brought entire civilizations to their knees. Planet after planet fell, their populations either slaughtered or enslaved under the watchful compound eyes of Emperor Izar, a tyrant known for his unyielding cruelty. But in the darkest corners of the galaxy, a spark of hope persisted, a spark that would one day ignite into a firestorm of resistance. This is the story of that fire and of the humans who dared to challenge the might of the Tholian Empire. Character backgrounds. Dylan Lewis was once a decorated space marine, hailed as a hero of the Earth Alliance for his valor during the First Contact War. But the horrors he witnessed left scars deeper than any physical wound. When the Tholians invaded New Eden, it was not the decorated officer who rallied the survivors, but the broken man seeking redemption. His past, filled with lost comrades and the weight of command, drove him to fight with a desperation that could only come from someone who had already lost everything. Jace Kessler, on the other hand, was an engineer by trade, a builder of machines rather than a destroyer of enemies. Yet when the Tholians turned Aegis Prime into a labor camp, Jace discovered a new purpose, to free his people, even if it meant becoming the very thing he despised, a soldier. His knowledge of the mining tunnels beneath Aegis Prime, once used to extract precious minerals, now served as a lifeline for the resistance. Every explosive he rigged, every tunnel he collapsed, brought him one step closer to reclaiming the world he had once called home. The human resistance. The early days of the resistance were fraught with despair. The Tholians' dominance was absolute, and the few who dared to oppose them did so with little more than hope and desperation. Small cells of resistance fighters formed in the shadows of occupied worlds, their numbers too few to make a difference, yet too stubborn to surrender. On Earth, the seat of the Earth Alliance, leaders debated endlessly on how to respond. It was in these dark times that the seeds of rebellion were sown, not by politicians or generals, but by ordinary men and women who refused to bow to tyranny. Strategic alliances. As the war dragged on, humanity realized that they could not stand alone against the might of the Tholian Empire. Messages were sent across the stars, seeking out other oppressed species who might join their cause. The negotiations were fraught with danger. Many aliens viewed humans with suspicion, if not outright hostility. But in the end, it was the shared desire for freedom that brought them together. The Glyceans, a race of amphibious beings, offered their stealth technology, while the Orion Syndicate, a loose coalition of smugglers and pirates, provided much-needed supplies and intelligence. These alliances, fragile as they were, gave humanity the edge they needed to turn the tide of the war. Battle descriptions. The Battle of Jericho Station was a turning point in the war, a clash that would be remembered for generations to come. The Tholian fleet, led by Admiral Czar, descended upon the station with a ferocity unmatched by anything the Earth Alliance had faced before. Plasma bolts lit up the void, turning space into a kaleidoscope of destruction. Human pilots, flying hastily constructed fighters, weaved through the enemy lines, their ships outmatched, but their resolve unbreakable. For every human ship that was destroyed, two more seemed to take its place, their pilots fueled by the knowledge that this battle could determine the fate of the entire galaxy. Project Chrysalis Deep, within the heart of the Tholian Empire, a secret project was nearing completion. Project Chrysalis, the brainchild of the Empire's most twisted scientists, sought to create the ultimate weapon, hybrids that combined the adaptability of humans with the raw power of Tholian warriors. The laboratories where these abominations were created were places of unspeakable horror, where the screams of test subjects echoed through the halls. Yet despite the setbacks and failures, the project continued, driven by the Emperor's unyielding desire to crush the human resistance once and for all. The final assault was a mission that would go down in history as the boldest and most desperate gamble ever taken by the human race. Every available ship, every soldier, every resource was thrown into the fray. The plan was simple: hit the Tholians hard and fast before they could unleash Project Chrysalis on an unsuspecting galaxy. As the human fleet emerged from warp, the Tholian defenses sprang to life, their web ships forming a nearly impenetrable barrier. But the humans had come prepared. Dylan Lewis, leading the charge in his heavily modified command ship, cut through the enemy lines with surgical precision, paving the way for the rest of the fleet. Epilogue. The war had been won, but the scars it left behind would take generations to heal. The galaxy, once dominated by the Tholian Empire, was now a patchwork of independent worlds, each struggling to rebuild. On Earth, a memorial was erected to honor the fallen, a towering structure that reached towards the stars, inscribed with the names of every soldier, pilot, and civilian who had given their life for freedom. Dylan Lewis, now a celebrated hero, stood before the memorial, his thoughts turning to those he had lost along the way. The fight for humanity's future was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. Prologue. The Rise of the Tholian Empire. In the farthest reaches of the galaxy, the Tholian Empire rose to power with a brutal efficiency that left countless civilizations shattered in its wake. The Tholians, a race of ruthless insectoid beings, possessed a hive-like society where individuality was sacrificed for the collective will of the empire. Their crystalline web ships, capable of ensnaring even the most advanced spacecraft, became symbols of terror, and their plasma weapons could reduce entire planets to ashes in mere moments. For centuries, the Tholians expanded their dominion, conquering world after world, their appetite for power seemingly insatiable. No one knew where the Tholians had come from, and few dared to ask. Some whispered of a long-forgotten homeworld, deep within the uncharted regions of space, a place where the Tholian queens ruled with an iron grip, their will enforced by legions of warriors bred for a single purpose: to dominate. The empire was governed by a strict hierarchy, with Emperor Izar at its pinnacle, a figure as enigmatic as he was feared. Under his rule, the Tholians became a force of nature, an unstoppable juggernaut that crushed all in its path. Yet for all their power, the Tholians were not invincible. Their expansion was driven by a deep-seated fear, a fear that one day the galaxy would rise against them. To prevent this, they employed a strategy of divide and conquer, pitting worlds against one another, ensuring that no coalition could ever form to challenge their supremacy. But in their arrogance, they overlooked one crucial detail: the resilience of humanity. Humanity, a species that had once been confined to a single planet, had spread across the stars in search of new frontiers. They were a race of explorers, innovators, and warriors, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a relentless determination to survive. But when the Tholians invaded the human colony of New Eden, they made a grave mistake. They awoke a sleeping giant, one that would not rest until the Tholian Empire was brought to its knees. Character backgrounds: the heroes of humanity. Dylan Lewis. The Ghost of New Eden. Dylan Lewis was once a man of honor, a decorated space marine whose bravery had earned him the respect of his peers and the admiration of his superiors. But that was before the First Contact War, a conflict that left him scarred in ways that no one could see. He had witnessed the horrors of battle, the loss of comrades, and the destruction of entire worlds. The war had taken everything from him, leaving behind a broken man who questioned the very purpose of his existence. When the Tholians invaded New Eden, Dylan had been living a quiet life, far removed from the chaos of war. But as the web ships descended upon the colony, laying waste to everything in their path, something inside him snapped. The man who had once been content to live in obscurity was gone, replaced by a warrior driven by a single purpose: revenge. Rallying the survivors, Dylan led a desperate counterattack, using every ounce of his military training to outmaneuver the Tholians. His tactics were unconventional, his methods ruthless, but they were effective. In the aftermath of the battle, Dylan emerged as a symbol of hope for the human resistance. He became known as the Ghost, a commander who could strike without warning, leaving devastation in his wake. But the title was not one he wore with pride. For Dylan, every victory was tainted by the memories of those he had lost, the comrades who had fallen in battle. His drive to defeat the Tholians was not born of heroism, but of a deep-seated need for redemption. Jace Kessler, the engineer. Turned rebel Jace Kessler had never intended to become a soldier. He was an engineer, a man who preferred to build rather than destroy. But when the Tholians turned Aegis Prime, his homeworld, into a labor camp, he had little choice but to take up arms. The Tholians had come for the planet's resources, stripping it bare and enslaving its population. But they had underestimated the resilience of its people, and of Jace in particular. As a young man, Jace had shown an aptitude for machinery, quickly rising through the ranks of Aegis Prime's engineering corps. His knowledge of the planet's mining tunnels, a labyrinthine network that crisscrossed the planet's crust, proved invaluable when the Tholians arrived. While others despaired, Jace began to organize a resistance, using his skills to rig explosives, sabotage Tholian equipment, and create safe havens for his fellow rebels. Jace's leadership quickly earned him a reputation among the resistance fighters. He was not a soldier by trade, but his ingenuity and determination made him a formidable adversary. Where others saw only insurmountable odds, Jace saw opportunities. He devised plans that no one else would have considered, using the very tunnels that had once been used for mining to launch surprise attacks on the Tholian occupiers. His actions inspired others to join the cause, and soon the resistance on Aegis Prime grew into a force that the Tholians could no longer ignore. But for all his successes, Jace was haunted by the knowledge that every life lost in the struggle was a life he could not save. He carried the weight of those sacrifices with him, driving him to push harder, fight longer, and never give up. The fight for Aegis Prime was just the beginning, and Jace knew that the road ahead would be long and perilous. But as long as there was breath in his body, he would continue to resist, for the memory of those who had fallen, and for the future of those who still lived. The human resistance. The birth of a rebellion. The Tholians' invasion of New Eden and Aegis Prime were just the opening salvos in a campaign of terror that would sweep across the galaxy. But while the Tholians believed they were subjugating yet another species, they were, in fact, sowing the seeds of their own destruction. Across the stars, whispers of resistance began to spread, carried by those who had escaped the Tholians' grasp. On Earth, the seat of human civilization, these whispers became a roar as leaders, soldiers, and civilians alike rallied to the cause. The early days of the resistance were marked by chaos and uncertainty. The Tholians' dominance seemed unassailable, their technology far superior to anything humanity had ever encountered. But where the Tholians relied on brute force, humanity relied on ingenuity. Small cells of resistance fighters formed in the shadows of occupied worlds, striking at the Tholians with hit-and-run tactics that slowly began to erode their control. On Earth, the Earth Alliance convened an emergency session to address the growing threat. Politicians, military leaders, and scientists debated endlessly on the best course of action. Some advocated for immediate retaliation, while others urged caution, fearing that a full-scale war would lead to humanity's extinction. But amidst the debates, one thing became clear: humanity could not afford to stand idly by. The time had come to fight back. The Earth Alliance began to organize the scattered resistance cells into a cohesive force, providing them with resources, intelligence, and training. Weapons were smuggled to occupied worlds, and communication networks were established to coordinate attacks. The resistance grew stronger with each passing day, its ranks swelling with volunteers who were willing to risk everything for the cause. And at the heart of this growing movement were leaders like Dylan Lewis and Jace Kessler, who became symbols of hope for a galaxy on the brink of despair. Strategic alliances, forging bonds in the fire of war. As the human resistance grew in strength, it became clear that they could not win the war against the Tholians alone. The Tholian Empire spanned hundreds of worlds, its reach extending into every corner of the galaxy. To stand a chance, humanity needed allies, other species who had suffered under the Tholians' rule and were willing to join the fight for freedom. But forging these alliances was no easy task. Many alien species viewed humanity with suspicion, if not outright hostility. The scars of past conflicts ran deep, and trust was a rare commodity in a galaxy where betrayal was often the only means of survival. Yet despite these challenges, humanity persevered, reaching out to any species that might be willing to stand against the Tholians. One of the first to answer the call was the Glecians, a race of amphibious beings who had long been oppressed by the Tholians. The Glecians possessed advanced stealth technology, which they had used to evade the Tholians' patrols for centuries. When the human emissaries arrived on their homeworld, the Glecians were initially wary, fearing that humanity sought to exploit them just as the Tholians had. But after seeing the sincerity of the human delegation, led by Jace Kessler, they agreed to share their technology in exchange for protection. The Orion Syndicate, a loose coalition of smugglers and pirates, also proved to be valuable allies. While not bound by any formal government, the Syndicate's vast network of contacts and resources made them a formidable force. They provided the Resistance with much-needed supplies, intelligence, and transportation, all in exchange for a share of the spoils. Though their motives were not entirely altruistic, their contributions were invaluable to the war effort. Other species soon followed, each bringing their own strengths to the alliance. The Zentauri, a race of telepathic beings, offered their unique abilities to coordinate attacks and gather intelligence. The Varesh, a nomadic species with a deep knowledge of the galaxy's uncharted regions, provided safe passage for resistance fighters and vital information on Tholian movements. Together, these species formed a coalition that, while fragile, had the potential to challenge the Tholians' dominance. But alliances forged in the fire of war are often fraught with tension. Cultural differences, conflicting interests, and the ever-present threat of betrayal loomed over every negotiation. Yet despite these challenges, the alliance held, united by a common enemy and the shared desire for freedom. As the war escalated, the bonds between these disparate species grew stronger, solidified by the sacrifices they made on the battlefield. Battle descriptions, the turning points in the war against the Tholians was fought across 1,000 worlds, each battle a test of humanity's resolve and ingenuity. But there were moments in the conflict that would come to define the course of history, battles where the fate of entire civilizations hung in the balance. The Battle of Jericho Station. Jericho Station was a key outpost on the edge of human-controlled space, a vital supply hub that kept the resistance fighters on the front lines equipped and ready for battle. When the Tholians launched a surprise attack on the station, it was clear that they intended to cut off the Resistance's lifeline, starving them of the resources they needed to continue the fight. The battle began with a devastating Tholian bombardment, plasma bolts raining down on the station's defenses. Human ships scrambled to respond, but the Tholians had come prepared, their web ships forming an impenetrable barrier around the station. For every human ship that launched, 2 more were destroyed before they could even reach the Tholian lines. But the defenders of Jericho Station were not about to surrender. Led by Captain Rena Vasquez, a seasoned veteran of countless battles, they fought back with a ferocity that caught the Tholians off guard. Vasquez ordered her pilots to execute daring maneuvers, weaving through the enemy lines and launching surprise attacks that left the Tholians reeling. The battle quickly turned into a chaotic dogfight, with ships from both sides engaged in close-quarters combat. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the station's defenses would not hold for long. The Tholians had breached the outer perimeter, and their ground forces were preparing to board the station. In a last-ditch effort to turn the tide, Vasquez ordered a risky counterattack, sending her remaining ships on a suicide run against the Tholian flagship. The attack succeeded, crippling the Tholian command ship and throwing their forces into disarray. With the Tholian fleet in chaos, the defenders of Jericho Station launched a coordinated assault, targeting the Tholians' vulnerable flanks. The tide of the battle shifted, and one by one, the Tholian ships began to fall. By the time the dust settled, Jericho Station was still standing, though barely. The victory came at a heavy cost, with over half of the station's defenders lost in the battle. But it was a victory, nonetheless, and it sent a clear message to the Tholians: humanity would not go down without a fight. The Siege of Aegis Prime. While Jericho Station was a turning point in the war, the Siege of Aegis Prime was a symbol of humanity's resilience. The Tholians had occupied the planet for years, turning it into a labor camp where humans were forced to toil under the watchful eyes of their insectoid overlords. But the resistance on Aegis Prime, led by Jace Kessler, had never given up hope. The siege began when the resistance launched a coordinated attack on the Tholian stronghold in the planet's capital city. Using the mining tunnels beneath the city, the resistance fighters smuggled explosives into key Tholian installations, crippling their defenses and cutting off their supply lines. The Tholians, caught off guard by the sudden assault, were forced to retreat to their heavily fortified central compound. For weeks, the resistance laid siege to the compound, cutting off all avenues of escape. The Tholians, desperate and running out of resources, began to turn on one another, their hive-like society crumbling under the pressure. But the resistance knew that time was running out. Reinforcements were on their way, and if the Tholians managed to hold out until they arrived, the resistance would be crushed. In a bold move, Jace Kessler led a small team of resistance fighters on a daring raid into the heart of the compound. Using a combination of stealth and brute force, they fought their way through the Tholian defenses, planting explosives at key structural points. As the compound began to collapse around them, the resistance fighters made their escape, leaving the Tholians to their fate. The explosion that followed leveled the compound, killing the remaining Tholian forces and marking the end of their occupation of Aegis Prime. The victory was a major blow to the Tholian Empire, and it sparked a wave of uprisings on other occupied worlds. The siege had shown that even the mightiest of empires could be brought low by the determination of those who refused to be broken. Project Chrysalis, the Tholians' darkest weapon. As the war dragged on, the Tholians grew increasingly desperate to maintain their hold on the galaxy. Their losses were mounting, and their once unshakable empire was beginning to crumble. In a bid to turn the tide, they turned to one of their most secretive and dangerous projects, Project Chrysalis. Project Chrysalis was the brainchild of Dr. Zeus, one of the Tholian Empire's most brilliant and twisted scientists. The project aimed to create a new breed of soldier, hybrids that combined the adaptability and resilience of humans with the raw power and intelligence of Tholian warriors. These hybrids, if successful, would be nearly unstoppable, capable of overwhelming even the most advanced human forces. The laboratories where Project Chrysalis was developed were places of unspeakable horror. Human captives taken from conquered worlds were subjected to gruesome experiments, their bodies fused with Tholian DNA in a process that left them disfigured and in constant agony. The few that survived the process were transformed into mindless killing machines, their will subjugated to the hive mind of the Tholian queens. But despite the horrors of Project Chrysalis, it was not without its flaws. The process was unstable, and many of the hybrids succumbed to madness or died outright. The Tholians' attempts to create the perfect soldier were fraught with failure, and the project quickly became a source of frustration for Emperor Azar. Yet despite these setbacks, the Tholians persisted, driven by the belief that Project Chrysalis was their only hope of victory. They poured resources into the project, even as their empire began to collapse around them. The hybrids that did survive were deployed on the front lines where their terrifying strength and ferocity struck fear into the hearts of human soldiers. The existence of Project Chrysalis was a closely guarded secret, known only to the highest-ranking members of the Tholian Empire. But as the war progressed, rumors began to spread among the resistance fighters. Whispers of monstrous beings that could tear through steel with their bare hands, of soldiers who felt no pain and showed no mercy. These rumors, once dismissed as fear-mongering, soon became impossible to ignore. The human resistance, now aware of the threat posed by Project Chrysalis, knew that they had to act quickly. If the Tholians succeeded in perfecting their hybrids, it could spell the end of the resistance and the fall of humanity. But finding and stopping the project would be no easy task. The Tholian laboratories were hidden deep within their territory, guarded by some of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. The mission to stop Project Chrysalis fell to Dylan Lewis and his team of elite soldiers. They would have to infiltrate the Tholian stronghold, destroy the laboratories, and put an end to the project before it could be unleashed upon the galaxy. It was a mission that would test their limits, and one from which they might never return. The final assault, the battle for the galaxy. The final assault on the Tholian homeworld was a mission that would go down in history as the boldest and most desperate gamble ever taken by the human race. Every available ship, every soldier, every resource was thrown into the fray. The plan was simple. Hit the Tholians hard and fast before they could unleash Project Chrysalis on an unsuspecting galaxy. The human fleet, now bolstered by their alien allies, gathered at the edge of Tholian space, preparing for the final push. The stakes had never been higher. If they succeeded, the Tholian Empire would be shattered, and the galaxy would be free from their tyranny. But if they failed, it would mean the end of humanity and the beginning of a new dark age. As the fleet prepared to jump to light speed, Dylan Lewis stood on the bridge of his command ship, the Resolute, surveying the fleet before him. It was a sight to behold, a vast armada of ships from dozens of different species, all united by a common cause. For a moment, he allowed himself to hope that they might actually succeed. The jump to the Tholian homeworld was swift and without incident, but the moment the fleet emerged from light speed, they were met with a wall of Tholian defenses. Web ships, plasma turrets, and minefields stretched as far as the eye could see. The Tholians had been preparing for this assault, and they were ready. The battle began with a ferocity that shook the very fabric of space. The human fleet surged forward, their ships weaving through the Tholian defenses with practiced precision. Plasma bolts lit up the void, turning the darkness of space into a chaotic light show. The Tholians fought back with everything they had, their web ships ensnaring human vessels and tearing them apart. But the humans and their allies were not deterred. They pressed on, their resolve unshakable. In the midst of the battle, Dylan led a strike team toward the Tholian capital, where the final confrontation would take place. Their target was the central command structure, the heart of the Tholian Empire, where Emperor Izar and his Council of Queens directed the war effort. The fight to reach the capital was brutal. Tholian warriors poured out of the city to meet the human forces, their crystalline armor reflecting the light of battle. But Dylan and his team fought with a ferocity that matched the Tholians blow for blow. They pushed forward, their objective clear, to reach the command center and end the war once and for all. As they fought their way through the city, Dylan received word from the fleet. Project Chrysalis had been activated. The hybrids were on the move, and they were heading straight for the human forces. Time was running out. If they didn't reach the command center soon, it would all be over. With a final push, Dylan and his team reached the entrance to the command center. The door was guarded by the Tholian elite, warriors bred for a single purpose: to protect the Emperor. The battle that followed was one for the ages, a clash of titans that would be remembered for generations to come. In the end, it was Dylan who struck the final blow, cutting down the last of the Tholian guards and forcing his way into the command center. There, he came face to face with Emperor Izar, the architect of the Tholian Empire's reign of terror. Izar, realizing that his empire was on the brink of collapse, made one last desperate attempt to bargain for his life. He offered Dylan power, wealth, and a place in the new order that the Tholians would create. But Dylan, who had seen the horrors that the Tholians had inflicted on the galaxy, refused. There would be no bargaining, no deals, no mercy. With a single decisive strike, Dylan ended Izar's life, bringing an end to the Tholian Empire and its reign of terror. The war was over. The galaxy was free, but the victory came at a great cost. Countless lives had been lost, and the scars of the war would linger for generations. The hybrids created by Project Chrysalis were still out there, a reminder of the darkness that had once threatened to consume the galaxy. And though the Tholians were defeated, the challenges that lay ahead were many. For Dylan, Jace, and the rest of humanity, the end of the war was not the end of their struggle. It was the beginning of a new era, one where the galaxy would need to rebuild, to heal, and to find a way to move forward. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity had proven that it was a force to be reckoned with, and that it would not be so easily defeated.